Tens of thousands of Israeli high school students fly to Poland each year to learn firsthand about the Holocaust, the worst genocide in human history and the most terrible result of anti-Semitism. When I was in high school in the late 80s, there were less than 500 kids going on this trip in the whole country. Today, there are more than 30,000.
יש כאלה תאים של השריפה, זה למעלה זה שמכניסים את הגופה והלמטה זה החומרי בעירה.
יצא להם גז
במקלחת, יצא גז ציקלון B. פה אנחנו רואים כבר את הגופות. אותה שהם יצאו, הוציאו להם את השיני זהב מהשיניים.
ורוב מי שעשה את זה היו יהודים ששמו אותם בתוך המשרפות, את הגופות. כל אחד יגיד מה החיבור האישי שלו למסע, למה הוא רוצה לנסוע לפולין?
אני דור שלישי לניצולי שואה, ומהרגע הראשון שסבתא שלי סיפרה לי על סיפורים על השואה, ראיתי את המבט שלה, מבט שלא נסלח ולא נשכח. וראיתי מה היא מרגישה, אבל לא הרגשתי את זה גם. זה בעיקרון מה שאני רוצה להרגיש במסע, את התחושת של לא לסלוח ולא לשכוח.
כל היהודים ששונאים יהודים. זה משהו שגם גדלנו איתו כזה, תמיד כזה היה שנאה ואנטישמיות. תמיד אני לא זוכרת שפעם לא הייתה אנטישמיות.
I thought I should speak with some of the blacks in the neighborhood to see what they feel about anti-Semitism.
I mean, like, there we interviewed this guy and he told us if there's gonna be like a Jewish guy and a black guy walking in the street, and you know somebody wants to rob, they would go for the Jewish guy because like he's an easier target.
Actually, no, he's wrong. They would actually go for the black guy because you go for a Jewish guy, you get more time.
You get more time.
Like the lawyers, the judges will actually give us more time if we rob someone of another race.
They're going to classify it as a hate crime.
Blacks rob each other because you get less time.
Actually, they're part of the mind control system that they use through television and the media. The higher ups.
That right there is in a book called The Elders of the Protocols of Zion. That was in like 1898. They was talking about how the Jews will use TV and media and propaganda to control the world and take over the world. So little things like that just, oh man. Who wrote that book? It was a Russian who wrote that book too. Whoever's watching this, Elders of the Protocol of Zion, read it. It gives you an idea of the blueprint to take over the world. It is.
It's implementing it right now.
It's actually, when you read it, they say it's false. But when you read it, you see everything coming to light.
The Protocols of the Elders of Zion describes how a group of all Jews sit around the table plotting conspiracies to take over the world.
But that's considered to be like a really anti-Semitic book, you know.
It is anti-Semitic to a certain. It's really not anti-Semitic.
It's not anti-Semitic.
It's like people keep saying things and they really don't know what they're talking about.
If somebody's telling the truth, if somebody's telling the truth about something, why does it have to be anti-Semitic? Because it's not in the Jewish people's favor. It's not anti-Semitic. It's just somebody being honest.
Facts is what it is. Bottom line.
No, but just to put things straight, like this book, the books of the elderly of Zion, the Protocols
that was
of
actually, they said it was written by a Jew actually. So it's really not anti-Semitic.
But this book was like kind of a fraud, you know?
Yeah, they say it's a fraud.
There wasn't such a thing, you know, it's like a bunch of people sitting together running the world, you know? This is kind of bullshit,
but
you know?
But you said that's bullshit?
That is not true. No, this is like a false book.
That's not bullshit. As far as like a bunch of people sitting together running the world. The United Nations is a bunch of people sitting together running the world. So how could you say that's bullshit?
No, it's different, you know, because...
All right, so...
Exactly, there's no difference.
You said some like pretty hard stuff about like, you know, Jewish people and stuff like that.
See, no.
Hold on, you gotta listen to
let me finish. I mean, like, so maybe when they like see you guys on the streets and they feel like afraid or they feel tension, there is something, you know, like...
That goes to what I was telling you before. They don't know us. They never took time to get to know us. She was telling you that they separate themselves from us.
They don't want to know us.
So when you don't want to get to know someone, you will never.
Speaking,
you're
trying to manipulate the conversation.
No, I'm just asking.
No, because we told you we have no problem with them.
ללא טקס קבורה וללא כבוד אחרון, נשרפו מושמדי פה בתנורים האלה. האפר שלהם שימש לדישון אחר כך לגרמנים. הם ניצלו את היהודי מהעבודה שהוא נכנס במחנה העבודה. עכשיו, כמו שהסברתי קודם, שליש מהנרצחים פה נרצחו בגז, ושני שליש פחות או יותר נרצחו על ידי התת-תנאים שהם היו צריכים לחיות פה.
לכו על זה. אז יכנסי לסגור את הדלת. כפתנית. היו הרבה מזוודות, שעל כל מזוודה היה רשום שם. היו בגדים של תינוקות, כפפות, חולצות, מכנסיים. היה הרבה זוגות נעליים של ילדים ושל מבוגרים. היה הרבה סירים, גל חץ לנעליים, מברשות שיניים, כל רכוש קיומי כאילו בסיסי.
זה עכשיו זה שרוצחים אותך בגלל הנאום שלך, שאתה שיער בגלל הנאום שלך, שאתה לא עשית כלום. שאתה לא עשית כלום.
כאילו כשאתה רואה את זה אתה אומר לעצמך וואי בא לי לרצוח את כל מי שעולל את זה, אבל בעצם לא, כי אם אני אהיה יותר גזענית אז יהיה מישהו יותר גזעני ממני וזה לא ייגמר.
אבל את מי בא לך לרצוח?
את מי בא לי לרצוח? את כל אלה.
מי זה אלה?
הנאצים, הצוררים האלה.
טוב, הם כבר, את יודעת, מתו.
כן, אבל תאמין לי שיש להם דורות. אמנם לא כמוהם, אבל יש.
Professor Norman Finkelstein, a Jewish academic from DePaul University in Chicago, has written a book called The Holocaust Industry, in which he accuses parts of the Jewish establishment of making cynical political use of the Holocaust.
Dr. Finkelstein, you have some visitors?
Whenever Israel faces a public relations debacle or comes under pressure to resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict, they start up this extravaganza called the new anti-Semitism. As it's usually understood, anti-Semitism means an irrational hatred of Jews, born simply of the fact that they are Jewish. But that's not what's going on. Here it's a hostility born of the fact that the state which claims to represent them is engaged in quite brutal violence.
Finkelstein lost his job at the university because of what he claims was pressure from the Israeli lobby. Then he was denied entry to Israel because he was, as the authorities described, a security hazard, which being Jewish himself is probably unprecedented. Finkelstein reminds me of the biblical prophets of doom, who were always being pelted with stones for saying things nobody wanted to hear.
One of the major kind of claims I hear from people like the ADL or, you know, other Jewish people is that, like, how come always people picking up on Israel? How come there are so much, you know, injustice, you know, in other parts of the world and nobody speaks about, you know? What is the reason for that?
I think people, listen, I opened the radio, I hear nonstop about Sudan. I hear nonstop about Tibet. I hear nonstop about Darfur. I hear a lot. The only place I hear excuses made for is Israel. That's the place where I hear excuses. And we do have to remember, it is the oldest occupation in the world. I mean, 40 years really is enough. It's older than you. It's older than you, the occupation. Doesn't that kind of stun you? The irony is that the Nazi Holocaust has now become the main ideological weapon for launching wars of aggression. Every time you want to launch a war of aggression, drag in the Nazi Holocaust. It's the suffering then used as another pretext or excuse to humiliate, degrade, and torture the Palestinians. That's the problem. The suffering comes as a package. It then comes, here is the suffering, now we blow up your house. Here is the suffering, now we take your land. Here is the suffering, now we drop artillery shell or shoot artillery shells at your villages. It's a package deal with Israel and its American supporters. It's not just suffering, it's suffering which is then wrapped in a club. And the club is then used to break the skulls of the Palestinians. That's the problem. It's not being used to educate people. It's not being used to enlighten people. It's not being used to make people more moral.
It can be.
But it's not.
I mean,
it's not. That's the whole point. Of course it can be, but it isn't.
At the time I first interviewed Finkelstein, I didn't realize what a controversial figure he was in the eyes of the Jewish establishment. Finkelstein, the son of Holocaust survivors, has been labeled a self-hating Jew, a Holocaust denier, and a madman. I had interviews stopped at the very mention of his name.
I know if you Google Norman Finkelstein and Holocaust denier, nowadays you'll get about 10,000 websites. Well, if I'm a Holocaust denier, I would have to be certifiably insane. I would have to be clinically insane. Because, given who my parents were, for me to be denying the Nazi Holocaust, I'd have to be clinically insane. So you have to judge for yourself. You may disagree with me, but is it your impression that I'm clinically insane? Now, if you think I'm not, then you have to wonder, why are those 10,000 websites saying that?